can I just ask you to introduce yourself?
So my name is Angel Baez. My nickname is Bagz, and I am a current personal trainer slash esports performance coach that is also going to become a physical therapist. I'm also studying to become a physical therapist, but I'm currently a personal trainer.
What is your educational background? Do you have any degrees or any certifications?
I have a background in exercise science, so I earned my bachelor's degree actually this last year. In addition, I also have certifications in personal training, primarily from NASM. So that is the base certified personal trainer certification, corrective exercise specialization, which actually led me to wanting to study physical therapy, fitness nutrition specialization, group personal training. Unrelated to NASM, I also have precision nutrition's level 1 specialization, associates in community health, and I'm working on my CSCS.
What benefits do you think a performance coach will bring to esports?
Being a performance coach in esports is actually a very interesting question, right? Because there's a lot of common ground in just being a performance coach who just treats gamers and being an esports performance coach. So I don't necessarily have to state the benefits even more than just being an exercise science performance coach, right? Evidence-based practice, having an evidence-based approach, which means that the methods that you use for interventions towards clients and athletes is all pretty sound science, right? Now, when you combine being a performance coach and having, let's say, an exercise science background, you can actually implement a lot of the evidence-based practice, like the theories, and relate them to being a good performance coach. So ultimately what you get is you get better outcomes in terms of physical. The gamers, people playing the games, actually they perform better in game because they're feeling better. They're not having any pain. And because of that, you get more longevity. So, in esports, longevity is a big concern, specifically because you're sitting very often and you're doing repetitive motions in the hand, the wrist, your hips are always activated. So if you get esports players to play longer, you don't necessarily have to sign players every 1 or 2 years. There's a lot of a financial incentive for teams and for companies, but also for the outcome of the player itself, just by having the effects or being around a performance coach.
What benefits do you think a exercise routine gives to esports athletes?
It's a two-pronged answer, right, in my opinion. So the first and the biggest effect is what exercise does with the general person, right? Because for the most part, gamers aren't going to be super jacked or super shredded because their occupation, right, is a gamer. If you're an esports athlete, your job is playing a game, and that means performing well in the game, and your body's kind of a vessel of sorts that helps facilitate what happens in the game. And that's communicated through your hand, your wrist, your body. When you think about just what the benefits of exercise are for people, a lot of that same overlap happens with esports athletes. Better blood work, so right, like LDLs, HDLs, in terms of like cholesterol, and you get the anaerobic and aerobic benefits of exercise, period. Higher VO2 if we're talking physiology, but just from a human perspective, this person is adding structure to their day, right? Exercise is by definition an activity, and it's an activity that positively increases your health. So if we're talking about benefits of an exercise routine, you have all the standard benefits of exercise, but because you're adding the structure of exercise, I used to play a lot of competitive video games. I was having a hard time adding structure to my in-game strategies, right? So one very specific benefit that exercise has for esports gamers is that the addition of structure, so adding structure to what they do, can help in kind of like a parallel way increase their performance in game. Because if a player is just good and they're talented from putting in the reps and playing the game consistently, adding kind of the reps and sets in the game, which kind of goes more a little bit into sports psychology, but still within the realm of an esports performance coach, you can help them become better at the game, kind of help them see how structure adds to their gameplay, but you're also getting a lot of physical and emotional and mental benefits of just exercise, period.
How does the exercise routine of an esport athlete really differ from the average person?
$1 million question, right? Do esports athletes need esports specific training? And it's an interesting response, right? Because from an exercise science background, video gamers, esports athletes, we all have a very similar theme. And this is a theme that's especially prevalent now in, as of 2021, the current pandemic, right? Sitting a lot. So there's a universal theme in all of that. Everyone is sitting, we're all sedentary, upper neck posture is questionable at best. We have a lot of forward posture. So when you think about esports athletes and regular sedentary individuals, there's a lot of common overlap. Specifically, that's lower back pain, excessive sitting, lack of mobility in the thoracic spine or in the upper neck because we're not moving. So really, it's moving. However, right, an esports athlete has a lot more repetitive motion in the hands and the wrists. Just like somebody who's sitting would have very tight hip flexors, for instance, because their hip flexors are constantly flexed and they're shortened. An esports athlete would have some kind of, they could have some kind of tendonitis in their hands and their wrists, right? Because when you think about the fingers and how they're extending, how they're flexing, how we're using this constantly. And gamers and esports athletes specifically have very high actions per minute. So they're moving like the speed of light, right? Your response time has to be on point. With lack of ergonomics or just optimal movement in the hands and the wrists, wrists and hands and fingers can get very cranky. In addition to pre-existing conditions like lower back pain or any other pre-exposed conditions that the person has themselves, just from life.
Do esports athletes really have any issues when they start an exercise program?
When you mean issues when starting an exercise program, do you mean like complications in the exercise itself, or do you mean complications in terms of like just general issues, like obstacles rather?
Either, really, if you have any experience with it.
One of the biggest, in my opinion, hurdles that an esports athlete has when starting an exercise program is just being consistent with it, right? Esports athletes live very non-traditional lives. They're living on the age of social media, right? So, their soft skills, they have to be on a computer for a lot of the hours of the day. Lifestyle-wise, not traveling a lot, especially now during the current pandemic. When you add excessive sitting, practice sessions that go between 5 to 7 hours, or just actually playing the game, it's really getting the self-efficacy to just get up and move. That, in addition to whatever complications or pre-existing conditions the esport athlete has, but that's kind of anecdotal and specific to the athlete. But in my opinion, I believe it's just getting started and being consistent with it. So in my experience, the best approach that I've had was kind of relating starting an exercise program to the athlete itself. So if I know what game they're playing, I can say, hey, I know you practice this game, X, Y, Z, and you do these specific techniques to get better at this game. What if we approach exercise that same way? And it's helped kind of mitigate the issues when starting off and being consistent. But really, to answer the question in one sentence, it's just time and structure.
Do you see less injuries and health issues after esports athletes begin exercising?
Yeah, so it's crazy stuff. And while I don't necessarily have the data handy, I would love to refer everyone who's watching this video to the team over at 1HP. So they're a team of physical therapists that specialize in treating esports athletes. So they just came out on Twitter with like a year of synopsis of all of the research that they've done in esports wellness and performance. The numbers are in an upward trend. So yes, less injuries, there are less health issues. But one of the biggest challenges is just having the esports athletes actually adhere to the stuff, or just having the big scope where esports athletes, or even just the casual esports player, right? Because not everyone's necessarily a sponsored athlete. Just having them to start moving and just keeping that consistent just to get better outcomes. But yeah, to answer your question, there's significant improvements. There's great improvements in terms of our longevity and performance, like in the game itself, due to implementing exercise.
Do you see any changes in mood and energy after esports athletes begin exercising?
Anecdotally, with the esports athletes that I've worked with, they tend to have less of a what you would call toxic mindset towards gaming once they start exercising, where they respond to stressful situations in the game and you internalize it. It's kind of like a very interesting parallel to fitness or to exercise in general, right? You start exercising, if you're not an experienced exerciser, you will be humbled the first time that you exercise. That's no different to when you start playing a game of, like, say, Rocket League, and you can't even score a goal. You can't even really run around the track because you don't A, know the controls, and B, the skill level just isn't there. So once esports athletes and once players, once they start to exercise and they actually put in the reps and the sets, they start to physiologically feel better. And that's no different than the average person, than someone like you or me who's sitting down and we start exercising. But that transfer of just a better mood or a better mindset is invaluable. And I think that is the biggest benefit that exercise would give to an esports athlete. It's just kind of a better mindset towards adversity. And you can almost not necessarily directly relate that to exercise.
Do you have any tips for esports athletes relating to nutrition?
My biggest tip, just one sentence: keep it simple. Just keep it absolutely simple. Nutrition is a very loaded topic, just in terms of a player's individual relationship with food, right? Just you as a human, what is your relationship with food? That, which could be cultural, can be societal, this could be socioeconomical. There's a lot of underlying factors when it comes to nutrition that I don't necessarily think are explored with the esports athlete, but keeping it simple is paramount, right? If you keep it simple and you try to positively introduce more efficient habits, such as mindful eating. I'm huge on mindful eating because mindful eating it allows you to realistically portion control or do a lot of the soft skills that helps with positive nutritional outcomes without overtly doing a sort of disordered eating pattern, right? Or just restricting diet or using a fad diet, things that have been shown to not necessarily work long term. So keeping it simple is one of the biggest things. If you stick to one habit at a time, whether that means having more lean proteins or more vegetables, or even reducing intake of foods that don't have a lot of nutritional density, or not necessarily substituting, but again, one habit at a time. If you start with one habit at a time, again, you can relate that to what the esports athlete is really good at, which is putting in the consistent sets and reps to get good at the game. Performance coach should just try to implement it in a realistic time frame, kind of like evidence-based principles. Stick with one habit at a time, be realistic, and be fair to yourself.
Do you have any tips for esports athletes relating to sleep?
We all know, right? Sleep is super important. Sleep is one of the biggest things, and yet, a lot of people, we struggle with sleep, and that comes down to two things, right? It comes down to either structure or just overstimulus. And maybe I'm oversimplifying it. Getting sleep is a very challenging component, but it's actually one of the most important components. So there are sleep gurus and sleep people who specialize in sleep. It's been shown that getting sleep directly impacts how you recover, both physically and mentally. It affects your mood. Sleep is extremely important. Probably one of the most underutilized and ignored concepts of people, right? We do three things: we eat, we sleep, and we breathe. Do I have any tips for people trying to increase their sleep? What works for me and what I would recommend to most people is just having a reminder on your Google Calendar where it just says, okay, unplug. For me, that's around 10:30 p.m. At that time, I have a push notification that bugs the hell out of me. I listen to the notification. I say, okay, unplug. Let's follow this direction. And social media is off. The television is off. Everything is off. And obviously, there are some days that are better than others. So, it may be more difficult to unplug a Wednesday than, say, a Friday, right? Because life can be stressful. Your Friday might be more stressful than your Wednesday. But have a book to the side of bed or have some kind of evening ritual that would, again, build structure so you can be consistent with it. If you're an esports gamer, have a guide on just general motor learning principles, because you can learn something in the 30 minutes where you unplug. It doesn't necessarily have to be excessively productive, but it should unplug you from having screen time and just be something that helps you go to sleep easier. And if you structure that, you're most likely structuring your sleep too. And if you're structuring your sleep, then you'll make sure you have enough of it.
What do you think is the biggest challenge working in esports?
That's a great question. The biggest challenge working in esports, I would probably say this from a triad approach of three things, right? first and foremost, it is the changing meta of whatever game it is you're coaching athletes in. You could have the best approach in the world and the meta can change, not benefit the player is struggling, and then now you have a client, right? If you're an esports coach, you have a client that necessarily has to, they have to convert to that changing meta. So changing meta in games and the landscapes of esports changing frequently, like any esport worth its salt will have seasons, right? And every season the game completely changes. So that is unlike any other traditional sport where football is still football 365 days a year. Season 1 of Apex is not like season 2 of Apex, for instance. On a whole, the game may be very similar, but a lot of the nuanced things that competitive esports athletes use, all of that stuff changes. So meta changing is one of the most important things. The second challenge working in esports is actually building rapport with the players. Players are very busy actually just trying to be good at the game themselves. So as someone myself who used to play and not necessarily I wasn't ready to necessarily hear the conversations of what an esports performance coach would tell me. I would say, yeah, well, I know I need to be healthy, but I need to practice this game and get good at it. And the approach and the solution to that is just saying, hey, listen, if you improve your health physically, mentally, then you'll be able to play better in the game too. And it doesn't take a lot of time either. Let's add structure to how you play the game to make you better, both physically, but also at the game through a secondary result. And then I guess the last challenge, and probably the most, not necessarily the most important, but teams seeing the value financially in esports performance coaches. We've seen a lot of change in that over the course of a few months to a year, but that's probably one of the biggest challenges is finding the revenue and the financial capital and the ability for teams to say, yeah, we need a top of the line esports coach, we need a nutritionist, because essentially the esports athlete needs all of these resources to maximize their performance in game.
Do you think it's really possible to be an esports performance coach full time right now?
Yeah, actually, I do believe it's very challenging, but if the esports performance coach kind of lives within the realm of esports itself, such as they understand the marketability and the platforms of social media, specifically Twitch, YouTube, Twitter, it's a very much so an untraditional approach, whereas the esports health and wellness coach will most likely benefit if they're actually the wellness coach. If they are the wellness coach of a team, then that in itself is a full-time job and it's a full-time responsibility. But to my last point, until every single team, the small teams, the medium scale teams, so every single team has an esports coach, there's going to be more teams than coaches, right? So because there's not a lot of positions, it's more challenging just outright to do this full time. But you can implement being an esports health and wellness coach full time if you have a YouTube channel and you're growing with your YouTube channel, if you're streaming on Twitch and you're coaching an actual team on the side. It's an untraditional way of doing it full time, not necessarily like working at a gym or working at a performance center, but because esports is still growing, this might be a conversation in 2 to 3 years where I'll say, yes, absolutely. There is a funnel right outside of university where you can just become an esports performance coach on an associate's or an executive level. But because it's still growing and we're still in a lot of unmarked territory, it is possible. It is possible for full time, but it's challenging. And you need to be aware of the different constructs that exist.
What advice would you give to someone who is looking to become an esports performance coach?
If you're looking to become an esports performance coach, first and foremost, the biggest advice I would give you is just to educate yourself. Me, myself, I consider myself an esports performance coach, but I also want to become a physical therapist, so I'm going to physical therapy school. That is anecdotal, that's me. But if you have a degree in exercise science, get CSCS, right? Go to continuing education seminars to learn, because being a good practitioner should come first before treating esports athletes, because esports athletes are just a niche in the general scope of the fitness industry or the performance industry. Don't skip the basics. and become a good practitioner first. Because by being a good practitioner, it'll actually help you understand the esports athlete a lot more, because you can relate your exercise science principles or your performance coaching principles, sports psychology principles, everything blends together, and learning will just help you in terms of coaching. That, and also play the game that you're coaching at least once, because if you've never played the game, it's really hard to connect to people if you've never played the game before. So you don't have to be the best at it. You don't even have to be proficient at it, but if you play it once, you can kind of see how the game is.
And then lastly, how can people get in contact with you?
So you could follow me at Uncyclable Performance. So if you Google Uncyclable Performance, you'll find all of my social media. Specifically on Twitter, it's UT_performance. On Instagram, it's at Uncyclable Performance or at Angel Bagz, BAGZ. Give me a follow on those platforms. If you want to contact me directly, you can just slide into my DMs, and then we can start a conversation or a dialogue.
Thank you, Angel.
You're welcome. Thank you, Russell. Thank you so much.